Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So as you can see, I've been reunited with this wonderful AT guitar made in Japan. I left it here because I wasn't exactly sure what my future would be about a year ago, and a lot of things changed, and I thought it was safest to leave this guitar with a friend who took really good care of it. Thank you so much if you're watching this video. But anyway, I was reunited with this guitar, so that's one of the reasons why I came back to Taiwan, to pick up some of my belongings. Anyway, since I have this guitar with me, I thought I'd do a solo, a very interesting solo. But before that, all of the videos that I make for YouTube take a lot of time to make, and recently I've been also offering transcriptions of the intro solos. This one is no exception, so check the pinned comment for the link to the sound slice notation. Anyway, it takes a lot of time, and the online thing is one of my main sources of income these days, and I make some money from, a little bit of money from YouTube. So if you can like, you can subscribe, you can share. The algorithm has changed recently. It's a lot harder to get views, and I get money from views, so it would really help if you can help with the algorithm. I don't know, comment, like, share, who knows. Thank you so much. And for those who want to support me financially, I do have a book on Gypsy jazz picking. You can find it on Amazon. I think you'll find all the links in the description box. You can buy something off of Sound Slice. I have beginning Gypsy jazz courses, beginner Gypsy jazz courses, that is. And you can buy something off of DC Music School as well. Whatever you can do helps a lot. Like, thank you so much. Last year I promised I'd make a video on the business side of music and how Corona has affected me. I'll make that video one day. Anyway, let's get started. So I was reminded of some Django Reinhardt anecdotes, and apparently the story goes that this solo and another one, this recording rather, and another one were the first two recordings of Louis Armstrong that Django Reinhardt heard, and apparently changed his life. That's what the legend says anyway. And I thought I'd transcribe this this one solo that Louis Armstrong takes over a tune called Indian Cradle Song. So remember, this is like the early 1930s. And basically the beginning of contemporary jazz, mainstream jazz as we know it today. The whole idea where you have these small combos and people would play a melody and then after trade choruses, improvise and all that stuff. So that's something that that was the beginning of that trend. And there are a lot of interesting things about this solo that I thought I could share with you. The guitar player is playing some interesting voicings. Unfortunately, the recording quality isn't very high, but I was able to make out certain things. Basically, the entire song is based off of like 3-4 chords, and you have passing chords that are not necessarily too important because obviously the improviser is not thinking about these passing chords, even though the harmony, the rhythm guitar player is playing them all the time, pretty much every chorus. So it's an A flat, E7, A flat, and from here on out it's A flat for another 6 bars. But the way the rhythm guitar player is playing the A flat, he's doing this. A flat, E flat 7, A flat. Okay, then after that you have 8 bars of, not 8 bars, 6 bars of E flat 7. But the rhythm guitar player is also having fun, just doing like little moves like. Okay, and then after, turnaround. A simple turnaround, just A flat, E flat 7. At least that's what the guitar player is doing. Second half, same thing. A flat 7, D flat, D flat minor, A flat, E flat 7, turnaround. And there we go, that's the whole song. I'll do it once uninterrupted. There we go. So let me explain the solo to you, because there are a few interesting things to talk about here. If you need to figure out what the notes are, just look at the transcription on SoundSlice. But of course, this is played not on the guitar, but I translated to the guitar, and I tried to use inflections that I think Django Reinhardt himself might have used, or not just Django, but guitar players in those days playing acoustic guitars. Another thing I should say is that I changed a few little nuances in the solo. Hopefully they're not too noticeable. I don't think it affects the overall feel of the solo. But what's very interesting is already the time feel that Louis had. It's a very confident time feel, really good time feel. And if you watch my previous videos, I talk a lot about the importance, this overlook aspect of jazz improvisation. People talk about scales, licks, whatever, but time feel and phrasing are so important. And I feel that his time feel in this solo is very relaxed, and he will go in and out of time, like kind of floaty. So and he was obviously playing in the moment in the studio, and so it's something that's probably near impossible for me to recreate 100% exactly the way it was done in the recording. So I played it with my own time feel, but inspired by what he did. And what I also did is I quantized a lot of the parts where he was kind of floating. So if you're interested in that aspect of Louis playing, then you have to listen to the original recording rather than mine. But mine would probably be a little bit easier to learn, just for this fact that I've kind of like played more in a, I wouldn't say like metronomic way. Like I purposely did time things in a particular way, but it should be easier to follow rhythmically. So again, myself, and I verified this with the recording. I looked at the recording. I follow the rhythm section, which is very typical of that era of jazz, but just a little bit behind the beat, so very little, so that you wouldn't even really notice that it was behind the beat. But I think it does affect something. A number of you shared this article with me about rhythm, that some scientists, they did some tests and they discovered that most musicians, for some reason, always preferred recordings where the rhythm was just ever so slightly, like a fraction of a second, like behind the beat or something like that. And that's pretty much what I go for. And it's something that I've noticed as well with when I've listened to a lot of players that I like. And I notice these things because I slow down the recordings and I listen so very attentively. Like I said, it's not something that you can casually pick up like that. And if you like the way I interpreted this solo, also pay close attention to how I interpret the notes. Like I have these little slides, vibrato, bends, and also use of legato and staccato. Well, I think I started with a slide. So that's like, there's some notes that are legato and some notes that are staccato, as opposed to all legato, right? Or all staccato. And I'm playing with these two different ways of accenting the notes, and I'm not consciously doing, I am consciously doing, but it's kind of like a feeling, and it's a feeling that I think is very important to develop. So, and here, so you have quarter notes. You can do legato, but I did it short, but not too short. So it's not like, sounds too much like a robot, or like, but more like this, right? And then I think I did like a kind of like something like that. I don't remember. And then I remember I did that. That's a very Django-esque ornament. A bend. And here's something that I copied from Louis Armstrong. So when Louis, at least in this recording, he would play when he would end a phrase on an off beat, like on an eighth note, he would make that eighth note relatively late. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Kind of like that. I don't know if that worked out. Okay, so that's something that you can experiment with. Record yourself if you have to just hear the difference. Here I'll put the eighth note a little bit earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4. A little bit later. 2, 3, 4. It's super subtle, but it becomes very, very apparent when you slow it down. And then when you compare it side by side, like one recording the other, it becomes quite noticeable. And it's something that I noticed Louis was doing probably subconsciously. And then here, there's a part where he was kind of floating, but I quantized it. I did this. And then this little... And there's something very interesting to talk about here. This is over an E flat 7. But already in the early 30s, was this recorded? I think it was recorded in the early 30s. What Louis then did is over the E flat 7, he was thinking B flat minor. Well, he was thinking E flat 7 here, but also B flat minor, but more specifically the upper extensions of B flat minor, which would end up being this. Kind of making this chord. Because he's not thinking F minor over B flat minor or F minor over E flat 7. He's thinking the upper extensions. Back to B flat minor here. And this whole thing about the upper extensions is one of the key characteristics of mainstream jazz, like bebop and all stuff, the kind of jazz that you learn in music schools these days. So already in early jazz, this was a typical sound, just used in a different way. It wasn't done like it's more bebop, right? But here it's more like very interesting. So looks like F minor, B flat minor. But really, as I said in the previous video, I'm not thinking F minor, oh then B flat minor. It's just a sound. And I see them all as being the same. So I just played B flat minor here, B flat minor 9, B flat minor triad, E flat 7, okay? And then same thing, B flat minor 7, then upper extension of B flat minor, but which looks like an F minor. So okay, so this is the phrase. I quantized it a little bit, but notice how the end of the phrase ends on the offbeat. This note, it's on the offbeat. And if you listen to the recording, the original recording, it's like the other one. Because it's on the offbeat and it's the last note, it's a little bit behind. And then you have this little break during the turnaround, and Louis playing a high note, and I tried to do this Django effect, this kind of thing. Then you have this. This is very interesting. I have to backtrack a little bit. We're going to go back to the beginning of the solo. The chord progression, remember, I remind you, is A flat to E7. And notice is pretty much thinking only A flat major. And when over the E7 chord, he's insisting on this note here, which is the root, A flat, but it's over an E7 chord. And luckily it works. So in his solo, he's not thinking, oh, there's an E7 chord, I need to explicitly outline the E7 chord. No, it just pretty much stays with one idea, and just luckily that one idea still happened to fit the chord, and he stays on this note. This is very interesting from a historical perspective, because as I've said in many of my videos, I remind many people that back in the day, jazz musicians many jazz musicians didn't really receive the kind, well, definitely didn't receive the kind of education that you can receive today, because that kind of education didn't exist back then. The words, the technical terms that they use, because I see this all the time, both on the internet and in real life. They'll ask a university educated jazz musician, how should I learn this? Well, you got to learn your scales, you got to learn your modes, you got to learn all these things and all these arpeggios. But there's so much evidence that back in those days, the kind of education that they got, if any, was so elementary. Just basic, super basic chords and pretty much just super basic scales, major and minor at most. And I think Louis was coming from that kind of school. And of course, Louis also apparently came from had a relatively troubled youth. So it's not like he was going to like jazz theory classes and working on his modes. He was getting in trouble. What it was back then that unfortunately we don't have today, at least not in the same way. What he had back then was that this kind of music was the music of the day, the popular music, and it was everywhere. He had community. He had this immersion thing going on. We have it today in another form, in an artificial way, usually, like internet, YouTube, all that stuff, and finding a community of like-minded people to help us. So yeah, that was the advantage that he had. Now, come this second half of the song where you have the same chord progression in the beginning, he's just thinking A flat major. And he's singing A flat major, but it definitely, the stuff that he plays, he's playing this ornament. This is a classical style ornament. Before these kind of bebop enclosures existed, they had things like this. These are all the ornaments that classical composers used, and that when if and when early jazz musicians got some kind of music education, it was based on this kind of education. So yeah, that ornament. Oh geez. So totally misses the E7 chord. But you know what? Louis doesn't care. He has his idea and he goes for it. So again, that's but you know, Grappelli also played that way. There were a lot of chords that Grappelli missed in his improvisation, and Grappelli definitely knew the chords because he played piano as well. So it's less, I've talked about this before, it's less about the individual chords, it's more about knowing where you're going and how to decide which chords you feel are more important. And every different musician will have a different idea about this. But in this case, I think Louis just didn't care about that E7 chord. Maybe he didn't even know how to play over it, because like I said, he was not a quote-unquote like academic musician. I wonder how much he actually knew about such things. That's the same also with a lot of like wonderful blues musicians. Like there's a famous Stevie Ray Vaughan recording. I forgot which song it is. You guys will have to tell me if you know what I'm talking about. You know, Stevie Ray Vaughan, one of the best blues musicians to have ever lived. But he had this one song, I think it was his keyboardist who wrote it, that had all sorts of chromatic harmonies. And boy, did Stevie Ray Vaughan not know how to play over it. Most of the time, when that chord happened, he chose not to play anything, or he played like something super generic. And maybe once or twice he played something completely wrong, because he just didn't know what to play over it. It was not part of his culture. And this E7, I mean, this is actually a typical sound early jazz, but it's a little bit out there. Okay, we continue. Then we have this. All A flat major. So you see, the rhythm player is doing this A flat, E flat 7, but in his solo he's just thinking A flat. So that's very important to note. And also in the first half of the chorus, you had these bluesy things. It's an A flat major chord, but he's playing the blues. Okay. Then we have this A flat 7 chord. And notice the use of, again, I quantized a lot of the solo, but the use of downbeats versus offbeats. It's, yeah, just vocabulary. Then here, it's very interesting. One of the horn players in the background plays an D flat minor early. Now, I don't know if it was a mistake on his part, but he corrects it right away by going up a half step. Was it a mistake or was it intentional to have this little, and after it goes to D flat minor? So in Louis, in that part, so this D, Louis does this. La, la, and here the rhythm is a little bit like floaty, and I tried to copy a little bit of that floatiness. Major 7. They did use the major 7 sound back then. This is a typical phrase from the old days. Let's say I have an A flat major chord. Da 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 da. Da, 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 typical old style 1930s sound. Okay, so yeah, major 7. But keep in mind that the rhythm player didn't play major 7, just played triad. That was typical of old style jazz accompaniment. Okay, and then you have this interesting phrase over the 5 chord. And it's just, well, if you want to justify it in terms of harmony, you could say it's like, it's over the E flat 9, E flat 7, but thinking a B flat minor 7. But really, it's just the melody. So let's go. It's not from a blues scale or anything, but it has kind of a bluesy feel to it. And it's all about the rhythm. And here's that same thing as I said earlier. You end a phrase on the offbeat and it's a little bit behind. Okay? Don't accent too much though, like the way I just did. I was just trying to prove that point. And then after the ending phrase, where I changed the rhythm just to suit my recording. 1, 2, 3, 4. Day, dum, dum, da, 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 dum. Blues. So it's very similar to some of the solos that I've been talking about in the past few weeks, where obviously it's important to know where the harmony is going, and it's ideal to know what the individual chords are, but then it's also important to make certain artistic choices in the name of melodicism and artistic expression. And this is a clear example of that, because as I've said in previous video, I know I repeat myself, but it's just so important that I at least remind you. In a lot of modern jazz education, they'll teach you, okay, you're in the key of A flat, so you got to master A flat arpeggio. And yes, it would be very good to know your play, but then what ends up happening is people start soloing like this. Let's they play a solo like this. And then all those things are nice to know, and you certainly can play that way to a certain extent, but if all improvisations were like that, it'd get really boring, right? And I think what I really appreciate about Django Reinhardt is that he did have that aspect in his playing. He definitely knew a lot about harmony in his own way. He knew a lot of arpeggio shapes, but he mixed it with this kind of sense of spontaneity, phrasing, artistic, the interpretation of the notes, and the melodicism that a lot of these horn or violin players had. So Django is a great example of someone who's mastered everything, except how to use his pinky and ring finger for solos. So there we go. Apparently that was a solo that had a profound effect on Django. And apparently the story goes that he heard this at this random guy's house, this random guy who happened to come across them and invited him over to listen to some records. And that was the first time he had heard Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and he was particularly marked by those two Louis Armstrong recordings. And the story goes that he spent the next, I guess, period of time, weeks if not months, hanging out at this guy's house, listening to the music, and like trying to absorb the whole essence of the way Louis Armstrong played music. And I think that shows a lot in Django's playing in the 1930s. I can't say this enough, but I think it's great to learn your modes, learn all these licks, patterns, whatever. It's all great, but try to develop your ears to hear things that are worth playing, like beautiful lines. Like this was such a beautiful solo. And the more you can develop your ears to hear such things, the better an improviser you will become. And the way you do this is by learning a lot of songs, immersing yourself in the music, grab your instrument, and try to figure out everything that you hear that pleases you. And if it pleases you, figure out on your instrument, develop the muscle memory to be able to execute the same kind of melodies, try to make sense of how the melodies are relating to the harmony and all that stuff. But there we go. That's all you have to do. And it's the same. It's exactly like learning a language. A lot of people, they go to language schools, they take lessons, but they never actually speak the language, because at the end of the day, they never actually try to speak the language. They learn all sorts of rules and everything. Well, there we go. Give it a try. Please leave a comment. It'll pay me 10 cents. Maybe 5 cents.